Hello everybody and welcome back to the Ship of Thesis and our second episode in our Crusader Kings 3 tutorial series. In the last video we discussed medieval hierarchy, we discussed what de jure and de facto meant, we discussed how you go about selecting a character to start on the map, and then we sort of dived a little bit into how the character screen looks, which if you recall is by pressing F1. So in this video, I promised that we would actually get the video unpaused, and I intend to keep that promise. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the things that we're going to look at today. So we're going to look a little bit more into the stats that you can see on the left-hand side. So we didn't really go into great detail on those, so we're going to explain what all of those mean. We are also going to discuss the traits a little bit more, because they're really important into how your character is built. And then we're going to move over to discuss alerts and issues, which are two different concepts that the game uses to try and nudge you in the right direction and tell you what you should or could be doing. And then we're going to go all the way over here to these menu options over here, and we're going to specifically look at the council option. And at that point, I think we're going to unpause the game. And we're going to hopefully encounter either a council event or a character event, maybe even both if we're really lucky, so I can explain what they are for, and maybe just discuss a couple of opening moves that you could be making if you were starting your campaign. It doesn't have to be using the count that I've selected. It could be whichever one you wanted on the map. Again, I said in the previous video, I would recommend feudal if you're totally new, but it could be anybody. And providing that you are following along, the concepts should, by and large, apply no matter where you're particularly looking in the world. Anyway, without further ado, I think that's enough of a recap of the previous video. Let's dive into talking about our stats. So you can see the stats here. There are 5. These are 5 primary stats. There's another one here which is actually a secondary stat, which is why it looks slightly different to the others. So these, if you are familiar with Crusader Kings, the Crusader Kings franchise, are pretty much the same as they have always been. But if you're totally new, I'll just give you a quick rundown on what they do. And again, like anything in Crusader Kings, you can hover over these things and get tooltips. In fact, just before we do discuss stats, I'm sorry, I said we were going to get onto them, and I'm not intending to take too much time, but there is something I would genuinely recommend that you do. If you hit escape and go into your options screen, there is the game options here, and you can change your tooltip mode to one that suits you. By default, the game is set to timer lock and 1.5 seconds lock delay. And what that does is, if we are hovering over something, can you see there is a little sort of dark transition that moves up the tooltip? If I try and move over the tooltip while that transition is happening, nothing, it disappears. Whereas if I wait until that transition is complete and then this kind of blue border surrounds the tooltip, that tooltip is now locked in place and I'm able to hover over it to find out more information. And you can hover over tooltips within tooltips and then eventually get to a point where you've literally done all of the babushka dolls for tooltips. It's very, very handy, particularly if you are new to the game. My recommendation would be to do one of the following. Either set the timer lock to be something like half a second, so that you're not spending forever and a day waiting for it to actually complete, or do as I do and set it to action lock, which, as you can see there, says press the middle mouse button to lock and unlock tooltips. I would personally recommend going action lock. I find it easier, but you know what, your mileage may vary. Anyway, with that little segue aside, let's return to looking at our stats. So again, you can hover over these and it will tell you what they are. The first one is diplomacy, and diplomacy is a measure of how much people like you. So are you effective at talking to people? Can you kind of win them over to your side of the argument? Are you charismatic, I guess would be a good way of putting it. Do you know how to move the machinery of state, as it were? Can you convince other rulers that you are correct and that your realm is worth listening to? Or indeed, can you convince your vassals that you're worth listening to? So that's kind of what that is an abstract for. And you can see there that this particular character has a diplomacy of 3. In the previous Crusader Kings game, it didn't actually tell you, I believe, what the stat was. You just kind of had to know, and you'd know that 10 was pretty much average, and I believe still is. Whereas you can see here, 3, it says, is terrible. So in this particular instance, diplomacy actually causes a general opinion malice to this character. So Count Guntbert is, for all intents and purposes, awful at talking to people, and clearly just upsets them with his bumbling idiotness. So unfortunately, he actually suffers a malice for being so bad at diplomacy. If he had, conversely, a very good diplomacy score, then he would be getting a general opinion buff, so he might be getting plus 10, for argument's sake, which would mean that people would just like him that little bit more. And as you can see there, it increases the effectiveness of diplomacy schemes. So there are also schemes that exist that use this stat. For instance, you can sway a character to like you. We're going to do that during the course, probably of this video actually, so we'll discuss that a little bit more later. Next up is Marshal, and we're very fortunate that this particular character is an excellent Marshal, and right now he's got an 18. It's because he's a brilliant strategist, which is this stat here. We're going to talk about, or this trait, sorry. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And that's affecting his levy size and his levy reinforcement rate. It also is affecting his advantage when commanding armies in combat. So if you have a very good martial score, you are a very good war leader. And as a ruler, providing you're the top level of your particular domain, so basically always if you're a player character, it affects your levy, which is just up here or just here, depending on where you want to look. As I said in the previous video, these are kind of copy-pastes of one another because you're the top liege, or at least the top liege for your domain. So, yeah, because he's got a really good marshal, he's getting extra soldiers, effectively. He can convince extra people to come to his cause, and they'll reinforce faster, and he can inspire them even more when he's in combat or make good grand strategic decisions. If he had a negative marshal, as in like a 1 or a 2 or a 3, I believe that would then cause a levy malice. Some of these don't cause malices. I can't off the top of my head remember exactly which ones do and don't. But yes, definitely, like diplomacy, as you can see, causes a malice. If he had a terrible martial score, that could well cause a malice. We could possibly try and find someone who has a terrible martial score, like this guy. So King Lothair here, he has a terrible martial score, and that is indeed affecting his levy size. He's getting -2 levies, and his reinforcement rate is -2, and his advantage would just be less than ours in combat. So if you remember from the previous video, we can press B to go back to our character, or you could just hit F1. Next up is Stewardship, and this is the ability of our character to conduct good administration of the realm. So in this particular example, you can see that it affects taxation. I believe it also affects development of the realm, but it doesn't say that here, so maybe it doesn't anymore. I'm pretty sure it does. I think it also affects like realm development, and whether or not your realm will do prosperous things, basically. And you can see here that we're pretty bad at this. We've only got a 4. We're also getting assistance from our spouse. So this is the lady that we mentioned in the last video who doesn't like us very much because we're sadistic. And yeah, she's trying to help us out because we kind of suck. And she's right now adding +1 to all of our stats. Next up, we have Intrigue, and Intrigue is basically skullduggery. It's your ability to spy on people, or dig up secrets on people, or assassinate people, do all sorts of things that are reasonably nefarious in nature, that you shouldn't really be doing, but could get something really cool out of doing. And one of the more interesting aspects of Crusader Kings, to be fair. I think most people are drawn to the intrigue within this game. It's very Game of Thrones as well, right? So yeah, you can see that we've got an 8 for this, so we're ranked as poor, but enough that we're getting a scheme discovery chance of +8 and a hostile scheme success chance of +8. So that scheme discovery chance is our ability to uncover schemes that are being used against us, and hostile scheme success chance is our ability to conduct hostile intent against other characters, not necessarily of other realms. They could be part of our realm. and just in general increases the effectiveness as an intrigue scheme, and also makes it easier for us to throw a character into prison if we decide to try and do that. Next up, we have learning, and this is basically how bookish our character is. Are they particularly smart? Do they read a lot of books? This will affect, I believe, your cultural, technological progress, as well as it says there, it affects our piety. So we're an 11. That's considered average. And we're getting plus 1.1 piety per month, which again is this stat here with the little cross. You will probably have a different symbol if you are a different ruler. Let's click on a Muslim ruler. There you go. You can see that they have a ruler for their faith as opposed to over here. So yep, that's piety. And then lastly, we've got this value here, which is more of a secondary stat, and that's called prowess, and that's basically how good we are in hand-to-hand combat, how good of a fighter we are. That value will determine how tough we are, how easy we are to kill or to not die in combat scenarios and battles, or indeed it allows us to kill many people. So to give you a little segue, you have under levies, you can see there, total soldiers 212 and knights 5. You will learn during the course of this tutorial series that knights are very powerful, and 5 knights, depending on their prowess, may well, in fact, I would say almost certainly will outclass 212 total soldiers. So having a good prowess score means that you are a machine that can mow down peasants very effectively during a battle, but it also means that if you through some form of event end up fighting another character, prowess is what will allow you to kill them or prevent yourself from being killed. So those are our stats. They are affected by these personality traits here, which we did mention in the last video, with sadistic, cynical, and content. These traits were developed over time, so they were probably developed as we were a child and growing up, and then various events caused us to obtain these traits. And various events during the course of the game can cause you to obtain more traits or change traits, depending on what happens. And hopefully we're going to see, maybe not one of those events, but hopefully we'll see what I call a character event. So that's on our list of things to discuss today, once we unpause the game. Next up we have a education trait. So this trait would have heavily affected this martial score down here, this 18. Each character, when they're born, gets a kind of, I guess, a leaning, kind of a natural sort of inclination, a sort of destiny that they would be great in a certain area, but it's only a almost like a what's the word? It's only perspective. It's only a potential. That's perhaps a better word for it. If they are given the right education, their likelihood of flourishing in that role increases. I think it's still percentage based. You know, you could still get it go wrong. But if you assign them the right person, and you give them a good guardian who will teach them well, then their education will be a very good education. And in this particular case, we can see that Count Guntbert is a brilliant strategist. He has a level 4 education, which can be seen by the number of stars on that education trait there. Which means he had an exceptional education. Couldn't get any better. 4 is the best that you can possibly get in any education. And each education trait is a form of one of these traits here. We are going to discuss education traits in a later video, probably. We might discuss actually creating a ward in this video, but we're going to go into more detail on how like education works, because it's a slightly detailed system, and maximizing how good your heirs are will help your dynasty become powerful in the long run. So that's brilliant strategist, and we can see here he also has a commander trait. This is something he will have developed over the course of the game, and in this case it's just been seeded because this is the start of the game, but as you have characters they will earn traits based on events, and in this particular case, because he's a martial character, he's developed a commander trait that makes him a flexible leader. If he was a steward, he might have developed a steward-like stat that would have affected his ability to administer the realm. So that's a quick run through of stats and how traits influence them, and that should hopefully very nicely segue into one of these alerts up here. This one in particular, the no lifestyle chosen. And the reason we want to look at that is because we had an education trait of brilliant strategist, which tells us if we hover over it that we get +8 martial, which is cool, just makes us all of the more better at fighting, but it also says that we get a monthly martial lifestyle experience of +40%. So what does that mean? Well, lifestyle experience is what dictates how you earn lifestyle perks. So there's a couple of ways that you could get to the lifestyle screen. You could click on this alert here. So again, I said earlier, alerts are something that let you know there's an important thing that you really should do. So in this case, this indicates we really should set a lifestyle because there's no advantage into not setting a lifestyle. You're just basically wasting a potential perk. So let's click on that lifestyle option, and that will take us into the choose lifestyle screen. And you can see down the bottom left, we've got our stats that we've already been through, and then we've got an option of picking diplomacy, martial, stewardship, intrigue, learning. So you'll notice each lifestyle is keyed to one of these primary stats. And in our case, because we had an education that was focused around martial, the game is telling us, because you were educated in the way of war, you get a massive bonus to picking this lifestyle, basically. We could pick whatever we want. We could say, no, I want to pick diplomacy, for instance. And as a player, that's perfectly within your rights to do. You could say, I want to go diplomacy, I want to go family focus, and I want to work down maybe the family hierarchy tree. You could absolutely do that. Or you could instead go with martial, and then you'll know that you're going to earn that experience faster. The game's encouraging you to do this, and it's part of the kind of role play element that the game encourages. If you do things that make sense for your character, then the game rewards you for going in that direction. One of the things that we didn't mention, and I'm just going to very, very briefly segue into, was the concept of stress, which is this meter here. So that was probably an important thing I should have mentioned in the character overview. And again, I just mentioned that the game rewards you for doing things that fits with your character, and that's very much based around your traits and when events occur, behaving the way that your personality is built, basically. If you behave against the way that that your character is built, then you will gain stress, basically. Whereas if you do things that are in line with your character's traits, you will either lose stress or you just won't gain stress. In the case of lifestyle perks, which you can also get to by clicking this button down here. In the case of lifestyle perks, there's no disincentive. I could go diplomacy. I don't suffer a malice for going diplomacy or stewardship, intrigue, or learning. I just don't get the juicy bonus from martial education. And given that each character in the game has a limited lifespan, it's pretty wise to go with the focus that you get the extra experience in, unless you have a real need to use one of these lifestyles. So let's actually click into the martial lifestyle and have a look at the things that we could pick. So in our case, we're getting really good experience for martial, so picking any of these would frankly be really good for us, but they all do very different things. Now, the first thing that you actually do is pick the focus itself. Now, all the focus actually does is give you a different set of stat buffs. It doesn't affect what you can pick here at all, so you can see there are 3 trees here. These trees are kind of tied to these focuses, or foci, I guess I should say. But if you take strategy focus, there's nothing to stop you from taking the gallant tree, and there's absolutely, as far as I'm aware, no debuff for taking the wrong tree versus the focus. So literally pick whichever one you would like to boost the most. They do different things. So very, very briefly, the strategy focus just gives us +3 martial. So we're already a really good martial character. +3 martial, are we currently excellent, or are we just good? If we go back to our... So we're currently excellent already. But if we weren't excellent, it would have been enough to take us into excellent, gaining +3 on martial. So that's just a straight up good stat gain. That would give us more levy. Or we could go with the authority focus, which would give us +1 martial, and would also give us dread. So dread is something that makes other players, or other characters in the game, I should say, fear us. And if they fear us, they'll be less likely to move against us directly. So they'll either be less likely to declare war on us, or if they're a vassal, they'll be less likely to rebel. And it also increases our control growth by +0.3 per month. Control is a concept of just how much is your domain actually under your sway, or your realm, I should actually say, under your sway. Do they actually listen to you, or have you just conquered them and they're still kind of rowdy and not really on your side? The more a province is under control, the greater the benefits you'll be able to extract from that province in very short terms. We'll discuss it more later, because we'll obviously be going to war with people at some point, and control will be a thing we'll have to assert afterwards. But for now, that just gives you an idea of what this focus does. And then next up is chivalry. So victory comes not through blood or gold, but from honor. Chivalry is a prowess-based stat, so we would become a very good fighter. It also makes us slightly more attractive, because we're a kind of gallant, knightly kind of character from a romanticized point of view, and it also gives us quite a big advantage boost. So if you wanted to just be a really good kick-ass commander, this is pretty good if you actually want to lead armies, because prowess keeps you alive. Each point of prowess translates into 10 toughness, which we're going to discuss when we discuss military, so don't worry, we will revisit this, but just know that if you have a high prowess, you are harder to kill. Oh, in fact, it will even say in the tooltip, right? It's a secondary skill, you're more likely to survive as well as perform well both as knights in battles and in duels. And indeed, you can see there, each point of prowess gives a knight 100 damage and 10 toughness. So a peasant, for instance, gets 10 damage and 10 toughness. So you can see that each knight is worth 10 men in terms of damage, at least. So those are the focuses. For now, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to take strategy focus, because +3 martial is pretty damn good. So we'll select that, and you'll notice that once we've selected it, it did say, before I clicked select, you can only change this every 5 years. So when you select one, make sure that you're happy to stick with it. You can't just hot swap this willy-nilly. And next up, we could just pick any one of these trees. So we can see we actually already have a stalwart leader over here. So this has already been unlocked by this character, basically, when the game was started. So you could choose to try and switch one of these, or you could carry on down the tree. Now, when you very first unlock your first kind of lifestyle choice, the money that you, or the focus point that you spend just gains you the focus, and then the next point that you unblock will allow you to select one of these. So we could take the strategy tree and start with Casus Belli discounts. We could go Serve the Crown, which would increase our control and dread, or we could take either courtship or chivalric dominance. These trees work in a way of you can only work down to the lowest point of one side of the tree before you need to go back and work on other trees. What does that mean, so that it makes sense? It means if I take, let's say, the gallant tree over here, and I decide to take courtship next, then I would be allowed to take promising prospects next, and I would be then allowed to take loyalty and respect, but I would not then be allowed to take peacemaker. I would need to have fulfilled all of these trees before I could carry on. So you can only go down so far down a tree equal to, you know, the kind of length of the other branches, if that makes sense. So for now, we've actually picked a lifestyle perk, and we'll be gaining experience towards martial going forwards. And when we get enough points, so we get 27 or 26 more... no, that's lies. Once we get enough points, we'll be able to unlock the second of 27 points, basically. Okay, you can also reset perks, so if you decide that you, let's say, inherit a character, which is very realistic. If our character here, Guntbert, dies and his heir succeeds him, she may well have been living for 30, 40 years before we even get to play as her. Guntbert himself is very young right now. He's only 20 years old. But let's say that we ended up as his child. She's only 3 years old right now, but let's say she lives for another 30 years before we die. Then she will have picked her own lifestyle perk, and she'll have already started working down a tree, just like Guntbert I should say, had managed to pick Stalwart Leader by himself before we even got to him. Our daughter might well end up all the way down a particular tree, and that would mean that we might not have the lifestyle perk choices that we wanted. So you can hit reset here. If you do that, you get all of your unlocked perks refunded to you. So you can see here that that's what would give you all your perks here. And then you can spend them how you see fit. But you do gain 100 stress, which is an instant mental break. Which I guess we could talk about. Maybe I should trigger a mental break just so that you guys can see it. In fact, I think I will, because I said that in this video I wanted to trigger a character event, and a mental break is certainly a character event. Some character events are driven by things that we do, like what I'm about to do, and reset this perk, and some character events will just happen to you. So sometimes you'll gain stress and there's nothing you can do about it, like a friend or a sibling or a daughter dies. You'll gain stress then. In this case, I'm choosing to induce stress by picking something that I know will be stressful. So I'm going to hit reset perks. And it says, if you do this, you can only do it once in a lifetime, and you're going to take a ton of stress. Reset. I have been overwhelmed by stress. And the funky music starts to let me know that something dramatic just happened. And when something dramatic does happen, you get this funky banner alert appear up here to let you know, hey, something just happened, dude. And it's like, you need to pay attention to this, because it's a dramatic effect. So if we now look over here, we will have had a mental break, and I think that will trigger when I unpause the game. So when we unpause later, we'll get our first character event. I'm going to spend the... I actually quite like the Gallant line, so I'm going to actually just pick it again. But yeah, I just wanted to let you guys see what a mental break looks like. It will trigger at some point now that we've actually hit the threshold. So that's lifestyle, and that was an alert. And you saw we got another alert when we'd actually reset that perk, just to let us know that we got points available to be spent. So next up, we're going to discuss issues. So issues are things that the game thinks you really ought to know about, but you don't necessarily have to do anything about. It's kind of, as it says there, a list of situations and suggestions, and they're kind of color-coded based on how important they are. So right now, it's telling us that one of our vassals has a low opinion of us, which means, he doesn't like us, and that could be a problem. And it also tells us that our bishop, our realm priest, is not endorsing us, which as a Catholic ruler is bad. So you can access the suggestions by pressing the tab key, or you can just hover up here and click on this button. So right now I'm going to actually action one of these issues. So this is a good opening move part of the game, particularly. So I'm going to actually do the sway scheme. So with our very terrible diplomacy of 6, we're going to try and sway Mayor Aticio so that he likes us a little bit more, because right now he thinks that we suck. He doesn't like that we are bad at diplomacy and that we're sadistic, and that we haven't ruled for very long. So let's click that. That is going to start a sway scheme against him. So this is a personal scheme that can trigger character-based events. And it gives us the sway scheme just down here, tells us what the success chance is, and if we click on it, it'll tell us kind of how long it's going to take. And over time, this scheme will fill up with progress until it eventually triggers, and then there'll be a percentage chance. In this case, it's currently 66% that it will succeed or fail, and then there will be consequences for whichever result that we end up with. Next, I'm going to click on the not endorsed by your suffragan bishop, because we kind of want him to like us, actually. So really, we should be swaying him, because him not liking us is worse. So I'm actually going to change my sway by right-clicking him and clicking sway and seeing. I'm not going to be very successful in all likelihood, but I would rather actually sway him. And then hopefully in time that particular issue will go away when we get to sway that character. So what have we covered? We have covered the map. Did I mention how we move around in the map? So you can use WASD keys to move around in the map, and you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You couldn't use WASD keys in the previous Crusader Kings 3 title, so I figured that one might be a good one to actually show you. If you end up somewhere looking, maybe you're on Crusade down here, and you're trying to conquer Jerusalem over here, and you kind of really get lost and forget where you are. If you hit the home key, that will take you back to your domain. So that's an easy way to get back. Alternatively, you could just hit the F1 key, and that would call up your character. And then you could just click on this shield here, because that's your primary title. And then I think if you double click it, yeah, that will take you again back to your domain. So there's a couple of different ways to achieve the same thing. Next up, we're going to talk about the council. So we mentioned that a vassal, and we also mentioned a suffragan bishop who is not endorsing us, and that means that we can talk about the council. So we can either click this button here, and that will load the council, or we can press the F4 key, and that will load the council members over here. So councillors are effectively our courtly advisors. They are important people in our court that we've promoted to have our ear, to basically give us advice and help us out in administering our entire domain. So in our case, we have a wife. So if you have a wife or a husband, depending on if you're male or female, you will have a character occupy this slot here, and they always have the ability to assist the ruler. So in our case, currently, she is assisting us just in general, which means that she's giving us +1 to all of our stats, with the exception of learning and stewardship, because she's actually better at stewardship and learning than she is in all of her other stats. Or we could say, assist me only in one thing, be that politics, chivalry, domain management, court intrigue, or patronage. And that's, again, based on how good her stats are. So let's say I wanted to be much better at stewardship because it's going to raise more taxes. I could tell her to help me in managing domain. She's no longer giving me +1 to any of my other stats. So you'll notice we did have 21 martial. We've now gone down to 20. We're now at an even worse diplomacy value. But we have at least creeped up to a 7 in stewardship, which is, slightly better. So that's the council action that your spouse will give you. Then you have your bishop. Now, if you're a Catholic ruler, you won't be able to select your bishop. But other religions can select their bishop, but I'm assuming that you've started in Europe somewhere, because it's one of the most iconic starting places. And if that's the case, you can't actually get rid of your councillor. You're stuck with the guy that you're given. And in our case, we've got an okay one. If he was bad, we might want to kill him. We can see that currently he doesn't endorse me, which is what that issue was up here. And his lack of endorsing me means that we won't gain any levies or tax from any of our church holdings, and that sucks. So we really want this guy to like us, because then he'll endorse us, and we'll gain taxes and levy from just the fact that he likes us, to be fair, from all of our church holdings. Again, notice that each of these council members actually uses one of the primary stats. So if we look over here, we had these 5 stats here, and they translate into what the 5 council roles are. So the bishop is a learning character, the steward is a stewardship character, funnily enough, the chancellor is a diplomatic character, marshal is a martial character, and the spy master uses intrigue. You want your characters who occupy your courtly positions to have a good stat if possible, because it makes them better at performing their duties. So where are we in terms of time? We are 34 minutes in, so I'm looking to wrap this up and actually unpause the game, because I promised that I would do that. So very, very quickly, I could give you a quick rundown of what these characters do. So the the bishop can improve your religious relations and also fabricate a claim on county. That is a very, very important aspect. It's one of the key ways that you will expand, and it's one of the first things that we're going to do in the game, in fact. So I quite fancy fabricating a claim over here on Ravensburg, because I happen to know that this county is de jure part of a duchy that I could be a holder of. So if we currently select the Duchy of Augsburg, so let me just start again because it's worth me explaining this. If I press F1 and go to the County of Augsburg and click that county, it will show us what that county is de jure part of here. So this is how you can find how your realm should expand. We discussed de jure and de facto in the last video, so go back and watch that if you're unfamiliar. But you can find from here what is the as it should be variation versus the de facto. De facto is where we are now. We own these three, and somebody else owns Ravensburg. But if we were to own the de jure duchy, we should own both Ravensburg and Alpsey as well, and then we would be able to be a duke. We could promote ourselves to become a duke. In theory, there are a few other requirements, but for now, that's a good goal to focus on, just becoming bigger and ranking up into a better title. So let's get our bishop to fabricate a claim on Ravensburg, and then you see we get this icon here, and it gives us a progress bar. So this icon will fill up as the game progresses, and it will tell us how close the bishop is to getting us this claim. Depending on his stat, he will either be better or worse at achieving this. If he's really good, he'll do it really quickly, and he will give us a claim on the duchy. Or he can potentially, give us a claim on the duchy. If he's really bad, he might upset a vassal or lose his piety or upset the target of the actual claim that he's fabricating. So again, you want to have good people if you can, but since we're Catholic, we can't get rid of this guy, unfortunately. Next up, we have the Chancellor. He can improve relations externally or internally. So foreign affairs basically means that people outside of your realm, he'll make them like you more. So let's say maybe he'll talk to the King of France, or maybe he'll talk to the King of Lotharingia. And through being a good diplomat, he'll make them like us, and they'll get like plus 30 opinion with us. That's one of the potential outcomes. Or he could shorten truce, as it says there. So if we've declared war on somebody and we have been successful or unsuccessful, I guess, but we then have a truce where we can't declare war on that character for X number of years, unless we're willing to take a massive penalty for breaking truces. But a Chancellor can shorten the truce duration, and a good Chancellor will do it effectively and do it faster. Domestic affairs mean that you can kind of influence your vassals or your liege, I believe. I don't believe that foreign affairs affects your liege. No, it is definitely domestic. So basically, people who are inside of your own realm, you'll make them like you more, or give you the option to maybe end an internal war or force partition for a vassal. Don't worry about that. That's a little bit too advanced for this stage of the tutorial. Next up, we have the Steward. He can collect taxes to make you richer. He can increase development in a county, which means he can make buildings faster and help the actual development of those counties so that they get better over time. They all do anyway have a very slow over time development increase, but this can just accelerate that slightly. And lastly, you can promote culture, just to make people convert to your culture type. So if we actually look at our character for a second, we can see that we are Bavarian. That is our culture. But if we select Kempten and we hover over that, it doesn't tell us in the tooltip, but if I select it, we can see that the culture of the county of Kempten is actually Swabian. So we may want to convert this in the long term to be Bavarian, because we'll get increased control because of that, and we'll also get some cultural benefits in terms of research. We'll discuss that in a future video. Next up, we have the Marshal. He can organize levies and train commanders. So that's basically, he can increase our number of soldiers, or he can make the commanders and knights that we have just more efficient, both of which are good. I personally prefer training commanders to increasing levy, but once you've done one, you might as well do the other. And lastly, he can increase control in a county. So we mentioned that very briefly earlier. If you have control less than 100 in a county, then you are not getting the full effect. So right now, we have full control over the county of Augsburg. I should hope so. It's our capital. But if there had been a war and somebody had laid siege to it, or maybe we'd only just captured it in a war, then I would expect it to not be at 100% control. And I could deploy the marshal there to try and get that control back up to 100 faster. Again, it does tick up over time anyway, but using a good marshal means you can get there that little bit quicker, and you get some events that kind of help you out with that. Lastly, in the council screen, we have the Spy Master, and this is the character who is responsible for keeping you safe from people stabbing you in the eyeballs, or spreading lies and rumours about you, or alternatively, spreads lies and rumours on your behalf by supporting your schemes. So Disrupt will protect you, and Support will encourage your hostile schemes. And then lastly, there is the Find Secrets option. So this allows you to find out dirty bits of gossip that you can use to great effect through the game, to either make vassals do your bidding, or to get people to join murder schemes, or otherwise agree to conditions that would not be favourable to them otherwise. So it's a very, very useful thing if you have a very good Spy Master. Very importantly, these people also have malices based on their effectiveness, I believe, on whether or not they like you. But the most important is that you never, ever, ever have a Spy Master who doesn't like you. As currently doesn't like us, but it's only by -1. If you have a really, really negative Spy Master, they are not going to keep you safe. So you might want to at least swap them for somebody else, or butter them up, or something like that. But those are the council options that are available, and those are you want good stats in each of these. However, you might not be able to easily have good stats available for these characters. Why? Well, because your vassals will also want, or your powerful vassals will also demand that they have a seat on the council. Now, you can ignore them, but then that means that they have an opinion malice of you. A quite hefty one, it's -40. And that can make them join factions and otherwise try to kill you. So you'll have to, as you grow, balance having very powerful vassals underneath you that make you more able to go to war and fight bigger people, but also you only have so many council slots. So there are various ways that you can manage that, and we will be discussing it in future videos. But I just wanted to give you an idea while we're on the council screen why it's not quite as simple as just get the man with the best stat. Sometimes you'll have to take the man or the woman who really isn't very good, but frankly is too powerful to ignore. So, without further ado, I promised we would unpause the game, and I'm going to do so by hitting the spacebar on my keyboard. So the game is now unpaused, and there we are. We have received our first character event, which is very handy because I wanted to talk about character events and councillor events. So hopefully we get one of both before I wrap the video up. So there are no end to the opinions and wants of my daughter and heir Gertrude. Half of the time she's trying to tell me what to do instead of the other way around. So having already played for a little bit now, I can tell you that she has probably gained the trait bossy. And in fact, if we hover over, we can see that Gertrude von Kempten has gained the trait bossy. And if we hover over bossy, we can see that that gives her a kind of martial and stewardship focus for this particular trait. And these are currently childhood traits, and they can in time convert into a grown-up trait, basically like the ones that we've got. We're going to discuss specifically how to rear an heir and to train your children up in a future video for now. So for now, we'll just say formidable or aggregating. It is a fine line to walk. And we'll just click that. And that was just an event where we don't get to say or do anything. It just happened to us. But right now, perfect timing, we have a mental break to deal with. So because we pushed our stress meter over 100, we have a choice of how we'd like to deal with that now. So this is an example of a character-based event where we get to choose what we're going to do. So Guilt and shame have been plaguing me as of late. All of my sins, my flaws, my failings, these dark thoughts distract me from my responsibilities and keep me awake at night. I feel I must do something to put an end to this mental anguish, but what could possibly help? So we could donate to charity to make up for our sins. That would reduce our stress. You can see the blue down line means reduce stress, and the red up line is even more stress. And then next to that, we have these kind of coping mechanism icons. So right now, if we did this, we would gain a new trait, which would be improvident, and that would give us +1 diplomacy. It would make our monthly income go down by 15%, but it would mean that we would lose 20% stress. That's quite bad. I don't want to lose 15% of my monthly income, so I'm going to ignore that. Or we could say maybe a couple of drinks will help, and we become a drunkard. Becoming a drunkard has some effects as well, though. It would make our stewardship go down by 2. It would also make our prowess go down by 2. It would have a tiny penalty to our health, but it would decrease our stress loss, and it would mean that other drunkard characters like us. So it's kind of a negative stat, but good in some circumstances. And by doing either of these things, we kind of gain a coping mechanism where we'll be able to donate or drink. Or we could say, do you know what? I don't care that...
That's what I reckon.
Oh, I set off Siri. Or we could say that I don't care that I'm stressed. I'm going to push through it. And as you can see there, it says, if you are still stressed in 5 years, you may suffer another mental break. So this is a bit of a gamble. We're currently at stress level 1, which means we have 100 stress. If we get events that can lower our stress, we can do this. We can say, I must be strong and resist these impulses. In fact, I'm going to, which is going to increase our stress by even more. I'm going to hit the space bar on my keyboard to pause, because as you can see, events are coming thick and fast now, even though we're on the slowest speed. And I'm just going to look over here at my stress meter, and you can see that we are at stress level 1, and we have 125 stress. So we need to reduce that stress in order to avoid having another mental break in 5 years' time, but also because we now have a negative 10% fertility debuff being applied to us. The stress levels go from 1 to 3. 1 is not too bad. Like right now, plus 10% fertility, and we can probably get away with it. Whereas stress level 2 and 3 get increasingly worse as time goes on. So just be aware of that. We also have another alert here, which is wedding celebration. So because we've started the game and this character actually isn't married and doesn't have a child, it spawns them for us, which means that we're getting married even though we didn't choose to. Normally we would have picked our own spouse, and then this would appear. In this case, I can choose to either gain 75 gold or I can gain 350 prestige. I kind of feel like I would take the prestige, but it's completely up to you. I'm now going to hit the spacebar button again to unpause the game, and I'm going to show you can speed up the game by pressing either the plus key on your keyboard, and then that will increase the game speed. So you can see here we've got 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we're going very fast. You can see the time is going really quickly, and we've now had another event kind of appear. So this is our liege is offering us to be a council member. So much like we have a council, so does our liege, and he wants us to serve as his marshal, which I think makes sense because we've got an excellent martial ability. So he's not really dumb. He's quite a clever liege. I'm going to accept. I'm also going to unpause the game again, and this time I'm going to use the 1 through 5 numbers on my keyboard to determine the speed. So you can use plus and minus like this to raise and lower the speed, or you can press 1 to set speed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the corresponding speed value. And perfect timing, the last thing that I actually wanted to discuss in this particular video was council events, and we've just had one appear, although I don't think it's actually our council. So it's kind of other character events. These are sort of minor events that we have zero control over, and they're sort of other characters. So where the events that have been appearing that we've been interacting with, they're happening to us. Their other characters are either doing something towards us, or we've kicked something off that's made something happen. And yeah, we've been able to interact or at least say, yes, that's happened to me. Whereas this event over here is kind of a something has happened in the world or with one of your councillors. In this particular case, this bishop, who is actually nothing to do with us at all, he's in the kingdom of Lotharingia, he has been exposed as being sinful, and he himself lost a level of devotion. I'm not going to talk about level of devotion in this video. I think we've been talking for around about an hour now. Yeah, 50 minutes. So I think this is a perfect place to stop. We've covered loads of stuff already in this video, and we did unpause as I promised. So we will come back in the next video and pick up some new concepts. I think I want to map out the tutorial a little bit more in my mind, so I can try and keep these. I want to keep them relatively short. I don't want to do massive videos, so they can be nice, focused pieces that you can learn segments at a time for the game. So without further ado, I am going to wrap things up before I ramble all the way to the finish. So thank you very much for watching. If you've been enjoying this series, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you've actually got anything you'd really like to see, I don't know everything that you guys want to get out of a tutorial series. So by all means, please leave me some feedback of what you'd like to see, and I'll be more than happy to take a look at it and see if I can accommodate your requirements. But once again, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you all next time.